Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 222 of Goulet Q&A. That's what it's called. You'd think I would remember after so many episodes of this. 222, it's just got this nice yeah, it feels good, you know. When it goes to 223, it's just gonna be like, oh, this feels so wrong. But 222 is gonna be A-okay. I do wanna give you a heads up. I'm gonna be taking off for Q&A next week because Andy, our videographer here, is going to be taking some well-deserved time off. And so we won't be shooting Q&A as normal. So that's going to be happening, but this one's going to have to hold you over for a couple of weeks. So I better make it count. All right, let's see here. What's been going on the last week or so? Had a couple of anniversaries to celebrate. One personal, one business. So personal side, Rachel and I celebrated our 12th wedding anniversary this past weekend, which is just crazy because 12 years goes by surprisingly fast. We've been together almost 17 years though, 12 of them married. And we realized the other day actually that we have had kids in our relationship longer than we haven't, which is pretty wild to think about that. Like, we've known each other, the two of us, more with children than without, which I guess is like, wow, that happened. And I think, was it not too far from now, less than a year or so, Rachel and I will have known each other and been in a relationship, I guess, for more time than we haven't. More of our lives than we haven't. So that's just crazy when you start getting to that point. Obviously, Rachel is a huge part of my life and makes me a far better man than I would be without her. So that's pretty cool. It was nice to celebrate. We went out to the Melting Pot fondue restaurant. That's kind of like one of our super special occasion places. We only go there every few years. But it was super good because I've been on a very restricted diet recently. I had a step back, got some foods back on the diet, so cheese and chocolate are okay now, and I definitely enjoyed that. So that was fun. And then we had a special anniversary at the office here because it's been a year ago this week, actually, since we started operating in our new space. And then one cool thing that we did here to celebrate that is we actually got a custom-built gaming console, like a big stand-up arcade, you know. Andy, insert picture here if you have one. But it's pretty epic, and we programmed it with all these old school arcade games and stuff, and it's all custom wrapped and themed with Goulet design. So that was pretty awesome. Big shout out to Drew for helping make that happen. He programmed the whole thing, so that was pretty cool. And then product wise, we've had a few things going on. So we had the TWSBI Go this week, which has been anticipated for a little while now. Very cool pen, very interesting. It feels to me like more of a kind of a student pen or like a kid pen. But, you know, I got one of each color, so certainly not limited to kids or students, but I'm going to give some to my kids and let them play around with them and stuff. But it's a really cool design. You know, the TWSBI's had great value pens all along, but this one really kind of takes it to another level. So what's really cool about this one is this kind of spring design. It's a piston, but the piston, you literally just push it down, so it's more like a plunger piston. And then it just pushes right back up. So when you go to fill up the pen, super fast, super easy. I did want to show you real quick, for those of you that are going to get these pens right away, how to disassemble them. We're going to try to do a more formal video, but I've been messing around with it. The easiest way I found is to pull the spring down. You unscrew in the opposite direction of most pens. Sorry, pull the spring down. You got to hold the piston rod. You unscrew it in the opposite direction, so righty-loosey, lefty-tighty, to take the knob off the back of the rod. You pull that out, and then it's got this, and then it's got this little metal piece right here that you have to unscrew, and that's actually what the threads are held in there. And then you can pull the whole thing out. If you are not mechanically inclined or you have trouble disassembling your TWSBI pens as it is right now, maybe just don't take this one apart, because unless you have a tinkerer's heart, you might get a little frustrated with this one. That was just a little band on the end of my spring that came off there. There you go. Put it back down, screw this back on in the reverse direction, and voila. So if you're dying to take your pen apart, it can be done. It doesn't come with tools like the other TWSBI pens do, so you pretty much get what you get. on these ones. But there is a blue version, and then there is a smoke version as well. There you go. Comes in this very efficient little packaging, but you can see here what the pen looks like. It's pretty cool. Ta-da! Available. It's got the same nib, number 4 size nib, as the Classic and the Eco. So, you know, it doesn't come with swappable nib units or anything like that, but if you are so inclined and you want to swap it on any of your other Classic or Eco pens that you have, you can technically pull the nib out and swap it between those. Just be careful with the fins on these feeds because they can be a little bit delicate and it's kind of a tight fit, so you might want to just be careful about that. But it can technically be done. Yeah, and then that's the TWSBI Go. So it's a pretty interesting pen. It's a $19 pen, so it's like kind of hard to go wrong. But you know, we got like 1 shipment this week. I don't know how many are going to be around by the time this video publishes because I'm shooting this on Wednesday when they've launched. I imagine they will go pretty good, and I think it's going to be a couple of weeks before we get another shipment of them. So you know, just hang tight. If you're excited about it, go ahead and jump on it now. Definitely, if we still have them by Friday, go ahead and jump on it. And then I think this is slated for Friday. I don't know. We haven't gotten the shipment yet as of Wednesday, but we do have a new Monte Grappa pen. This is an exclusive, a Goulet exclusive that we have kind of co-designed with them. This is called the Elmo, and it's a beautiful, beautiful resin with a steel nib. The color that we have here is called Rossio Ciliegia. I probably butchered that pretty bad. But anyway, it's a really nice, kind of like a, I want to say amber, but that might be a little bit more yellow. It's like a cinnamon kind of color. Beautiful swirls. It kind of reminds me of some of the other Italian resins I've seen, like from Delta in years of old. You know, I know it's made from really nice resin. Nice Jowo nibs. I love the design on this nib. Cartridge converter pen. Comes with a converter, and yeah, it's just a really nice pen. I don't think it's eyedropper convertible because it's got the metal like piece in here, but it takes standard international cartridges and converters. Pen writes really nicely, feels really good. It's got a nice weight to it. Yeah, just a really solid pen, sub $200, which is something that Monte Grappa, I don't know that they've ever done that. So I know we tried really hard to get this into kind of like an affordable range, which Monte Grappa is typically like a luxury brand, but they're trying to be more accessible to, you know, the pen community. So that was a pretty cool move on their part, and so we're excited about that. Yeah, so we're pretty pumped for that one. We also picked up Nettuno, which I don't know that we're going to launch that this week. I think that's coming next week, so be on the lookout for that. That's another kind of up-and-coming starter brand from Italy. And then we have the Aurora 88 Saturno. We only got a handful of those, which I don't know if we'll have those by Friday either, but if we do have any, beautiful looking pen, and you can look at that one. And then we have the Aurora Optima Nebulosa as well that happened this week. It's the same purple material that we had in the 88 Nebulosa a year and a half ago. There's a rose gold and then a, I forget the other trim, what it's called, but there's 2 different trim versions of that one. Only have a handful of those ones too, so I think they're going to be really popular as well. So if you're dying to get one of those Auroras, I would maybe move on a little faster. Conklin Monteverde is going to be coming back to us very, very soon here, if it's not already by the time this video launches, with Bach nibs, which is a Goulet exclusive that we've kind of arranged with them. So we've been really out of stock of all of their regular nib offerings for months now because they had some stock issues and manufacturing issues on the nib side of things. So as part of helping to kind of hedge against nib shortages in the future, they're going to have a different type of Conklin and Monteverde nib on their other pens, and then we are going to have Bach nibs on their pens. So that kind of helps to spread the load a little bit. There's, you know, I've talked about this a little bit here and there, but there's a lot of companies out there that are kind of having some nib shortages and stuff, which is, I think, a good problem to have. If in the grand scheme of problems, you know, I think that a lot of companies are growing. There's a lot of newer pen makers coming on the scene and stuff like that, and nib production is, you know, getting strained in a way from some of the major nib manufacturers. So that's good, because it means a lot of people are getting pens, so that's really cool. But it's still kind of an issue. So it's something that I hear and buzz about kind of in the pen industry. So And then we have a couple of new knock cases as well, the Tallulah and the Sapelo. So that's pretty cool. This is, you know, different kind of stuff. This is the Sapelo, I think is. It's a notebook holder, and then it has a little pen sleeve here. You got to have a nice, firm, clip on whatever pen that you put in here, because if you don't have a firm grip on the clip, it could theoretically slide out. This one's pretty good shape here, the Elmo. Elmo does good, but other pens like a TWSBI Go wouldn't fare so well in a case like this because it doesn't have a clip. So if you had it in here and you had a notebook, theoretically the pen could just kind of slide right out of there, and that's my pen, so it's okay. But anyway, it's something you want to be cognizant of, but you know, 25 bucks, so not too bad. If you want just really a notebook holder and you can, you know, figure out a way to put your pen in there. But I love the color scheme of that. So that's something that we got now, and the Tallulah, which is a 2-pen holder. So it's got individual slots over here, zipper case, and then you can either put more pens on the other side, if I know you, and I probably do. Also, it's made for like business cards or whatever other little notes, or if you want to keep little cut up index cards or something like that. I don't know what you do, but if you want a 2-pen holder zipper case there, it's $30. We try to carry like leather alternatives because that's what most pen cases are made of, and Knock is a really good option for that. So anyway, that's just some new stuff that we've kind of got for this week. We got new stuff that's constantly coming at you. Got a bunch of things for next week, but I won't get into them too much because there's just so much up in the air timeline wise. I don't know what's going to be coming, so I'll have plenty to talk about when I come back in 2 weeks. All right, pen and writing questions for this week. Let's get to the actual questions, right? You're like, enough of this stuff. I don't care about you showing me all the new things. I want to know pen knowledge, right? So pen and writing questions for this week. First one is from Louis Liano on Instagram. How do you clean textured pen grips, such as the ones with the TWSBI Diamond 580 ALR or the Tactile Turn Gist, without leaving small specks from a microfiber cloth or a paper towel in the grooves? Okay, I just so happen to have both of the pens that you mentioned here, because that's exactly why I have such a big pen collection, is I like to be able to show you guys the pens when you ask about them. So the 580 ALR is very similar to the TWSBI 580. I showed it in Q&A here a couple of weeks ago, but the most notable difference, I mean, the material is a little bit different. It looks aesthetically a little bit different, but the biggest difference that you're going to see is the grip is this kind of textured, it's very, very finely textured grip, but it's a textured grip nonetheless. And that really just wigs some people out. Me, I don't mind it at all. I like kind of having a tactile feel on my pens. It's something different. You know, would it be my primary pen? I don't really know, but I like having it in my collection and it doesn't really bother me. Other people, it's like they just can't even stand to hold it. So it's kind of thing, it's like, it's kind of tough to tell unless you know. But it's very, very fine ribs, and I can understand if you're using a paper towel or a Q-tip or something like that, microfiber cloth as you said, and you're trying to clean it out, how you could have an issue, especially if you're going kind of against the flow of the thing. Me personally, I have not had an issue with the TWSBI one because they're very, very, very shallow grooves. They're very clean. And I find that if I just go with the groove, like around the diameter of the pen, I really don't have an issue with something like a paper towel. You know, even right now, it's granted it's not wet and inky and stuff like that, but I mean, it's not really leaving any residue behind. So I don't really have an issue with that as long as I keep it there. If I'm trying to rub it down, like against the grooves, that's when things get a little dicey. Yeah, so there's that. But I find that if there is anything stuck in any of these, well, sorry, let me save that for a second. Tactile Turn is a little bit different story. The grooves are a little more sharp, I guess. They're not as rounded over as the TWSBI ones, so you feel it a little bit more. This is the Tactile Turn Gist. We used to carry this brand, but we don't at the moment. And these, this is the titanium one, but it's got the same kind of thing, except it's not just textured on the grip, it's textured on the entire pen. So it's a very interesting, different kind of feel. This one to me grips a little bit more than Lamy. I still, not Lamy, than the 580 ALR. I find that if I still go with the around the diameter of it, then it doesn't really affect me too much. But if I try and go against it, that's when it just cuts up the paper and causes a problem. So really you just need to be intentional about the direction that you're going mainly. But I think that if you've got anything like really kind of worked into those grooves and you want to really be able to get it out, using something like a toothbrush or like a small brush that has bristles of some kind really will help to get that out, especially if you're like at the sink or whatever. You just take a little toothbrush, do that real quick, and then you're in good shape. And if you have a paper towel or something, you just want to kind of pat it dry. You can either pat it or just go around like that, twist the pen in the paper towel, and you should be in good shape. So hopefully that's not too much of an impedance for you. But if you're already sketchy and you're like, I don't know about that grip, and you're like, I don't know about cleaning it like that, maybe just skip out and get the regular version of it. You'll be in good shape. All right, arianas.father on Instagram. Was there something inherently wrong with bladder-style fountain pens that led to the industry change to either cartridge converter, vac power filler, or piston? In all my searching, it seems that bladder-style filling systems went away many years ago, and now only vintage pens seem to have that style filling. This is a good question. I will be completely honest with you. I may not be the best person in the fountain pen industry. In fact, I'm certain I'm not the best person in the fountain pen industry to answer this question, because this goes back into like vintage pen history, which is not necessarily my forte, but I will do my best to give an educated guess about the answer. So I did my own little research too. There's some debate. I didn't find anything 100% firm, and probably there's some people that really know Parker or Schaefer or some of the brands that were like really big in the vintage doing the bladder style stuff and then made it through, those individual companies that made it through those transitions. I just don't know enough about the history around that time frame of why that happened, but I have some really educated guesses that I'm gonna share with you. So it's definitely true that bladders are way less common than they used to be. I think that was much more of the standard. I think some of that has to do with just technology, and I think that I'm going to be really careful when I use my wording here, because I don't want any of the hardcore vintage pen folks who kind of swear by their bladders to get really mad at me. So I'm not going to say anything is better or worse than any others. I think that there's just some guesses that I have. So it's my understanding that part of the change was due to convenience. So vintage history-wise, you had the bladders and all that kind of stuff. You would get some burping, you'd get some leaking. It just kind of happened. As technology evolved with fountain pens, it got better, but it was still not super uncommon. It was kind of a fact of life that fountain pens could leak, because you're dealing with, fountain pens are essentially a controlled leak anyway. And it would happen sometimes when you have a bladder full of ink, especially if you're flying or anything like that. That's, pens would get the reputation for leaking. How bad that actually was, I don't really know, but I know that it was like the iPhone of the day. Having a fountain pen was your portable method of written communication back in the day. So kind of everybody had them, and that was the standard. And so not everybody loved using them, but they used them because they had to. Once the ballpoint pen was invented in the 50s and 60s, it became much more reliable. That really took a punch to the gut in the fountain pen industry for the convenience factor, really. For a while, ballpoints were not as reliable. Once that got to the point where they were cheaper, more reliable, and didn't leak as much as the fountain pens were, they started to take over like crazy, and things just got kind of dicey in the fountain pen world at that time. And I don't have all of my dates down pat for when different cartridges and converters and stuff like that started to come out, but it's my assumption that that had probably something to do with it. I think in order for fountain pens to kind of stay in vogue or stay useful and stay current with the convenience factor of ballpoints, that's when things like cartridges, ink cartridges, started to become really popular. And really pushed by manufacturers, was to kind of compete with the ballpoint. So the cartridge converter, the converter kind of came out of the fact that they wanted to have disposable cartridges for the convenience and on-the-go factor with fountain pens. And then therefore you can't have a cartridge when you have a bladder pen. So the bladder kind of went away, cartridges came to be, and then they had other things as technology evolved, like the pistons and the vacuums and stuff like that. But bladders kind of fell out of vogue, I think, around that same time, due to the ballpoint industry kind of slaughtering fountain pens, for lack of a better term. You had far fewer retailers, far fewer repair people who were repairing pens. A lot of pen companies started to consolidate or shrink or move or shut down. So there were just fewer kind of craftsmen who were in the pen, and craftswomen and craftspeople who were in the pen industry around fountain pens. And so there are fewer people that could replace sacks, repair them, parts and stuff became less available, and so everything went to kind of warranty and service repair and all that kind of stuff. So whereas when you have something like a cartridge converter, you don't have that as much, because you can just replace the converter, or cartridges, you're replacing them constantly. So that added to kind of the convenience. So that's what I kind of think happened. Not that replacing a bladder is all that hard, but it does require some effort, and I think that kind of just mixed in there. So these days, it's not that bladders have completely gone away. There are definitely some, like, Conklin, which is, again, a vintage brand. It's kind of gone away and then come back, and so Conklin now has been revived, and they have some pens like the Crescent filler that has a bladder inside of it. Any pen that you have, like a Crescent or a lever filler, aerometric, these are going to have bladders in them. So this one, it's got a pressure bar, and you push down on the Crescent, it compresses the bladder, and then it fills up the pen. I think that these days there's certainly a convenience factor that you lose with a bladder filling pen. I mean, you get a little bit higher ink capacity with these oftentimes than you do with a cartridge converter, but to clean these things out is a kind of a pain, frankly, in my opinion. It's really a labor of love. You gotta enjoy doing it. The people that I know that use them don't change the colors out all that often, because there's really not a way to speed it up. You pretty much have to press it and then let the bladder decompress. Press it down, let it decompress while it's in the water, and you got to do that over and over and over and over and over again. So that's kind of a thing. Here's a pen from a couple of years ago Visconti had. It's called the Millennium Arc. So they call this the Arc filler. It's a similar concept in the way that it works to Conklin's pen. It's got a bladder inside with a pressure bar that you press down, and then it's got this little ring that you kind of spin around there so that it kind of locks it in place. And then, here's a vintage Schaefer that I have that is a lever filler. Similar concept. So it's got a bladder inside here with a pressure bar, and when you push the lever up, it pushes down that pressure bar. And then when you release it, that allows the negative pressure to suck ink up into the pen. So this is more of a vintage style, and literally is a vintage style. And then this is a newer pen that I have. This is a Wall Eversharp Deco Band. And this pen, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a pro at filling this thing. I don't know if there's a special mechanism or something, but I'll at least show you the bladder of how this one works. This one's got a bladder too. So if I unscrew that, you can see here's the bladder. So it's got a decent ink capacity, but again, kind of a pain to clean out. So very interesting pen, very large pen, this one. Very pretty pen though. So anyway, there's a few out there. This one is still made. The Conklin Crescent's still made. Visconti doesn't have the Millennium Arc right now. The Schaefer one's vintage. There's a couple others out there that have bladders, but you're right. There's just not a ton of them. Of the ones that I've carried before, really the Millennium Arc is kind of the only bladder I think that I've actually carried here before. And it had some people that had a tough time filling it. There were some that there was some burping and stuff like that. It's kind of some of the same things you run into when you have eyedropper fill pens. At least, again, I don't have a ton of experience with bladder pens. Not all of them are like that, but I know that it can be prone to doing that. More so than like a cartridge converter pen. So I think for modern convenience sake, and manufacturers are like, why would they make a bladder if people don't know how to use them as much, and they are a little more prone to leaking, they're a little higher maintenance, just not as popular. So that's why you don't see quite as many of them around. All right, now let's move on to paper, shall we? So this one is from isabellagobrien on Instagram. What determines fountain pen friendly paper? I realize it's relative, but are certain weights or smoothness better for less bleeding or feathering? This is a very, very common question. I'm sure I've answered it at some point, maybe a couple times in some capacity here on Q&A, but I'll be honest with you, after however many thousand questions I've answered, I just couldn't find it. So I'm going to go ahead and answer it again, and I'm giving you some context of some certain notebooks. As Colin was helping me pick this question, he put a note in here like, hey, maybe you can give some tips about when you're shopping for a notebook at like a department store or a bookstore or something like that. Is there anything that you can look out for? And I was like, okay, that's cool. It's kind of a different spin. I haven't really taken it down that road. So that's the angle I'm going to take to this question is, if you're shopping, like even like physically, or just, there's notebooks around at a lot of different places. How do you know if there's going to be fountain pen friendly paper? And the long and short of it is that, who determines, or what determines fountain pen friendly paper? Like you do. I do. Whoever's using the product. There's no fountain pen paper police out there. There's no trade industry, designation or certification or anything like that happens. So really it's the Wild West in terms of who wants to say that their paper is fountain pen friendly, or who amongst us users determines whether or not something is crossed that threshold into being fountain pen friendly. So I think in general, the terms that are used when talking about fountain pen friendly paper is, there's certainly a smoothness element. Typically, if you have really textured paper, that's not necessarily, considered to be fountain pen friendly, but it's a factor. Generally, it's smoother, but that's not necessarily a deal breaker for everyone. I think the paper weight is usually a pretty good indicator. The gram weight or the paper thickness. In the US, you have pound weight paper, like when you're buying inkjet paper, 20 pound, 24 pound, 28, 32. That roughly can be equated to the gram weight. Technically, it's grams per square meter. GSM or GM or GM2, or with the little squared 2 or something like that. And what that means, that designation, the grams per square meter, it's literally if there was one sheet of paper and you cut it into 1 square meter, how much does that paper actually weigh? So if you have 80 grams per square meter, if you have one sheet of that paper in 1 square meter, it's going to weigh 80 grams. If you have one that's 90 grams, that's how much it's going to weigh. It's 90 grams. So you can pretty much deduce that a 90 gram weight paper is going to be thicker because it's the same dimension in the weight measurement. It's just thicker paper. That's the only, it's the only way you can go is if the size, the height, the length and width are the same. The height's the only thing that can change the height, that thickness of paper. It's not necessarily the only factor, because there's other things like coatings and different pulp and density and stuff like that of the paper. So even the gram paper weight of paper doesn't necessarily mean that that's the thickness. And that's one thing that trips some people up, as you think, 90 gram paper, that's going to be thicker than 80 gram paper. Probably, but not necessarily. Even still, that's usually the only actual designation that you get on a notebook that can be somewhat objective. Pretty much everything else is going to be very subjective. The things that matter when you're really looking for fountain pen friendliness is it going to be ink resistant? Like, is it gonna allow the ink to dry on the page as opposed to soaking in and spreading out? Feathering is when it's like gets this kind of like caterpillar kind of effect where it like has these little offshoots. When you have really absorbent paper, that can happen. The spread is like when it like just kind of goes out from the line. You have a fine nib and it looks like it's like a highlighter. It just kind of spreads out like crazy and looks really fuzzy and flat looking. That's not a really quality that you desire. So having a very ink resistant paper, it's heavily coated so the ink really sits on top. It stays true to the line that you're putting down. So if you have a fine nib, it's going to write a fine line. If you have a broad nib, it's going to write a broad line, maybe pool up on the page. And it's not going to bleed through on the back. Bleed through is another term that a lot of people are looking. So fountain pen friendly paper is not going to bleed through to the back. So if you write on one side of the page and you flip it over, you're not seeing what you wrote coming through on the other side. So you can actually write on both sides of the page. Another term is called ghosting, and that's when you can, maybe it hasn't bled all the way through, but you can see, kind of, it's almost like a sheer, like a translucent kind of effect you get when you write on one side of the page and you flip it over, and you can see, and it kind of competes with, that's called ghosting or show through or echoing or something like that. So sometimes if you have a paper brand that has more of like a premium quality to it, premium is sometimes a term that's used, though that could mean anything. A lot of times premium is something you could just slap on just to make it more expensive. So it's a little bit of deduction you have to make there depending on what notebook you're looking at. I grabbed a bunch of different notebooks that I have just kind of on my notebook shelf over here just to see, like, is there any consistency at all, at least with some of the notebooks that I've grabbed, towards what's actually on the packaging and marketing materials and how good a paper quality it actually is. So looking at a brand like Clairefontaine, for example, which is, for me, kind of the gold standard for fountain pen friendly paper. It has the sheet count, it has the 90 gram, it says G/M2 grams per square meter. And that's pretty much it. It doesn't really say anything else. It's got the dimensions, but it doesn't say anything fountain pen friendly. It says PEFC, which is the sustainability certified kind of thing. But it doesn't say anything about like being better for fountain pens. And I have a couple different notebooks, both of them green apparently, and it doesn't really say made in France. It doesn't say. It's not marketed as fountain pen friendly, which is that right there is like, well, dang, that's like the standard of paper that people know. Rhodia is kind of the same boat. Rhodia and Clairefontaine are in like the same family. Theirs, they say, 80 sheets, high grade vellum paper is what Rhodia says. That's pretty much the only designation that it says in terms of like being like a premium quality kind of thing, aside from just typical stuff like measurements and all that kind of stuff. So vellum is another term that's like that's kind of used as a term for high grade paper. Real vellum is usually made from like an animal skin, like a goat skin or a sheep skin or something like that. You're probably not buying paper that's made of animal skin, if I'm guessing, but that was the premium paper like back in the day. You think like Dead Sea Scrolls type stuff, that's what it would have been made of. I've got this notebook. This is something I got out of Japan. This is a Pilot notebook actually, and you're gonna be mad because the paper in here is awesome, and I'm gonna show it to you, but it says super quality paper for fountain pen. So that is pretty explicit. And that comes from a fountain pen company, and the paper is really good. That's the most explicit one that I have, which is why I wanted to show you, even though I don't sell it. Apica is another one. It says premium, so that's pretty good. Choose the paper like you would a good pen. Okay, good instructions, but it doesn't speak anything of the quality itself. Quo Vadis Habana, another good one. This uses Clairefontaine paper, actually, and it says that, premium Clairefontaine 90 gram paper. But other than that, doesn't really say anything about its fountain pen friendliness. Let's see here, what else I got. Gilalo, another really, really good paper. This is one where it can trip you up a little bit because it's made to look like kind of the old style hand-laid vellum, because back in the day, and mine's fallen out of its tablet here, but it's got like a watermark and it's got kind of this laid paper look. Back when they actually used to like make it out of like parchment or animal skin, and then it would dry it on like a rack and it would get this kind of textured look. So they emulate that here. Not as much of a smooth texture, but still very ink resistant. So that's kind of interesting. But again, other than saying made in France, which you could assume good quality there because they care about their paper in France, doesn't say anything about fountain pen friendliness in particular. Tomoe River, same kind of thing. At least, it's got Japanese writing on here, which I can't read Japanese, so I don't know exactly what it says. But at least in the English on here, it doesn't say anything about being premium or anything like that. Another one that I have, Cicero. This comes out of, where does this come out of? Brazil, I think? I can't remember. But it says 80 gram on this one. Page count, doesn't say anything about paper quality. And then Moleskine, I have a couple of different Moleskines. This is just a ruled journal. You know, page count, sheet count. It says acid-free paper. You know, that's one thing you might see is acid-free or pH neutral. Those are good designations to have. That speaks to the kind of archival quality of the paper. When you have a acidity in your paper, that's like newsprint. Like that's usually something that less expensive paper like newsprint is made to be disposable, right? If you ever have a newspaper that sits around for a few months, it gets yellowed, it dries, it cracks. It doesn't last very long because they use acid to, you know, basically wash and kind of neutralize the pulp that's in the wood in the paper. And no, sorry, forgive me. I'll try to explain some of the paper process. I don't 100% understand it myself, but the paper is bleached in order to, you know, make it look like white or make it look, you know, the color that they desire. That turns the pH really high. They use acidity or acid to counteract the bleach. So if you have pH neutral, that means you're not going to have either a highly bleached paper or you're not going to have a really acidic paper. So, and from what I understand, it's rather difficult to do that process. To have it pH neutral, it's more expensive to do that, so you only get that on higher quality paper. But it means it's going to last longer. It's pH neutral means it's not going to turn yellow and crack and stuff like that. I think I explained that right. I'll be honest, I've had a heck of a day today, so my brain is kind of melted. But anyway, that's what I believe the whole process is. So that probably doesn't help you a whole ton. But I will at least just say that probably the best thing for you to do is either to familiarize yourself with the brands, try the product yourself if you can, and really just rely on reviews and information you get from trusted retailers or bloggers or reviewers or whoever that know that the fountain pens will work on that paper. And it's kind of a crapshoot otherwise. All right, next question I have is from, how do I even say this? R4CH4ELD. Rachel on Instagram. I don't know if the 4s are A's or what. But anyway, creative name, but also a good question. Is a crack in the grip section at the feed or nib end of the section fatal, or can the pen be rescued? Feed and nib section of the pen. So I'm just going to grab my TWSBI Go here because I've got that. If you have a crack at the end of the pen here, is that fatal? Typically what I see when there's a crack there, it comes from injection molded pens. And it happens on the injection molding line, especially if there's been a lot of pressure that's used with the pen. This can happen with certain flex pens, or if you take a flex nib and you put it into a pen that maybe didn't originally have a flex pen, and it happens to line up with that injection molding line. In fact, as I'm looking at the TWSBI here, the injection molding line is right there, right at that grip. I wouldn't anticipate with this one because this is actually pretty thick and this plastic is going to be pretty sturdy. But it's not often I see that cracked grip, but I do know what you're talking about and I've seen it before. It's really going to be a problem if you have a pen, you know, like TWSBI here, where this TWSBI Eco or a TWSBI Go. Not to say that they have this problem, but a pen like this, because I'm using it, I just have it in my hand, so I'm using it as a demonstration. Because the nib and the feed insert directly into the grip of the pen. That's when you're going to have the most trouble. If you have a pen that has a whole separate nib housing on it, it's not necessarily going to be as much of an issue. And I'm going to see if I can get this Monograppa Elmo off of here. So I'm going to remove the cartridge converter and I'm going to remove the housing. So this one, it's got a housing in here, and so the ink is going to be flowing through the housing. If the housing is intact and there's a crack on the grip, say you drop it, say you sit on it, say you do something, and you get a crack in the grip of this pen, it's not going to be as much of a problem because this one has the nib and feed contained inside this housing. It's going to be more of an issue with a pen with an arrangement such as the Go, where the nib and feed fit directly into the grip of the pen. And the reason it's going to be a problem is because there's a certain amount of air-ink interchange that has to happen in order to allow the ink to flow properly through your fountain pen. If you have a crack and you have the nib and feed sitting in here with a crack, that means you're either going to be letting in too much air, letting out too much ink. It's probably going to flow too much, especially if you're writing with pressure. Then it's going to flow too much and you're going to get blobbing. When you're carrying it around, you're going to get leaking that's going to happen into your cap, and that's going to be an issue for you. Less so of an issue with a pen that has a separate housing inside of it, but still could be an issue, especially when you're filling your pen initially. You can get ink that can come up in that crack, and it can kind of hang out there, and it can get on your fingers as you're touching it and stuff like that. A little more of an inconvenience, not necessarily like a complete fail of the pen, but still not great. Okay, so if you have a crack at that part of the pen, it could or maybe could not be fatal, but it's definitely not good. And it's the kind of thing, like, depending on the pen, you know, some of the TWSBI pens, if it were to happen with them, you can get replaceable nib units on the 580 or the back 700. The Go, the Eco, not so much. So if that happened on the pens like those, you'd be kind of stuck. You know, you pretty much need to either, you know, if it's something that happens right away and you're still within the return period of whatever retailer you got it, you may want to reach out to them. Us if it was us, somebody else if it was somebody else, and see, especially if it was something that happened in normal use. You know, a pen cracking at the grip like that shouldn't be happening with normal use. If you know that you did something, you dropped it in the parking lot, you sat on it, it rolled off the table and smashed onto the ground, you know, that's kind of on you. And you might be into like a repair or a warranty maybe type service. It might be something you have to go direct to the manufacturer to try to do. But that's going to be your judgment call depending on what's happened to your pen exactly. But yeah, good luck with that if that does happen to you. If you are in a situation where you don't want to pay for repair, you don't want to return it, or you're past your window or whatever, and you still want to try to make it work, you may, with some skill and practice, be able to repair the pen yourself if you get a split or a crack. What I would recommend trying first is a 2-part epoxy if you are going to do that. Now realize that if this is already cracked, you probably avoided the warranty and you're going to be on your own anyway. And you may or may not, like a pen like this, you're not going to want to send it in for repair. But you may be like, whatever, I got nothing to lose. A 2-part epoxy, that's where you like mix it 50%. You know, you can buy little syringes of it at a home center, or you can get like larger tubes of it if you use it all the time. That can be really good. That has a longer open time than like a super glue. Super glue is a cyanoacrylate glue. It's literally like acrylic in acetone. That's why it's called cyanoacrylate. So that evaporates really quickly and dries really fast, which can be good, but it can also dry too fast. And so CA or super glue can be good, but it may dry too fast. And it's also, it's like if you get it on your fingers and touch another part of the pen, you're gonna like leave a fingerprint on the pen. Epoxy, you get a little more open time. It takes a little longer to mix it up and do all that, but you can usually kind of like work it into the crack a little bit and then kind of wipe off the pen, and then, you know, take what I would do is, if you have a crack in there, take the glue, try and get it in there, and then take like a piece of like Scotch tape, you know, like just a typical, you know, like this kind of tape, and wrap it around that grip. Try and do it as tightly as you can to get it to like really bond as that glue dries. But again, that's very much a hack, a repair kind of thing. You may or may not be up for that, but that's the approach that I would take. All right, next question is from Huguni on Twitter. Is there a fix for the nib not being friction fit as tight as possible? One of my Jinhao has a nib that will sort of shift every now and then. Dude, I know what you're talking about. Or dudette. I actually can't tell by your avatar. But either way, I know what you're talking about because I have some Jinhaos, surprisingly. And you can take the nib, and this is not just on Jinhaos, but it can be other pens too. You can actually take the nib and kind of rock it back and forth. I'll show you here. With the relation of the nib and feed, I can actually take and just kind of shift it like that. And it can happen over time, especially if you're removing your nibs a lot, if you end up swapping your nibs from one brand to another. You know, it all depends on how it's manufactured, how much you've kind of like disassembled and removed and wiggled it around. And, you know, if you install another nib that's really tight in, you know, like, you know, certain like flex nibs and stuff like that. I know people that use like Zebra G nibs or something like that, and they'll kind of like jam them in here. And then when you go to put a regular nib back in, maybe you've kind of loosened it up a little bit, you know, that kind of thing. So that could be that kind of situation. Really, unless it's like wiggling to the point where it's like hard to write, or, you know, it's like almost falling out of the pen because it's so loose. It's not really going to hurt anything, you know, even if it's like shifted to the side a little bit here, it could potentially cause some flow issues, but usually you're getting enough ink to it where it's going to write just fine, and then you can just kind of like move it back if you need to. But yeah, usually the reason it's going to shift like that is because you're putting some pressure on it and you're rotating the pen in your hand a little bit. So you're causing it to kind of like push to the side a little bit, but then you just kind of roll it over, kind of push it back, and then just kind of keep on going. Or you can usually kind of just write and keep going anyway. It's really only going to be an issue if it's, again, so extreme that it's actually causing flow issues or something like that. But, you know, is there a way that you can repair it? What did I write in my notes? I feel like I was more clever last night. Short of swapping out the feed, you know, which is probably not really worth the trouble on an inexpensive pen like a Jinhao. It pretty much is going to be what it is, you know, the feed or the housing or anything like that. With plastic housing and feeds, that's where it gets tough because you can't really heat set, you can't really do much with it, and there's not a whole lot of adjustment that can be done. So for a pen like a Jinhao, if it starts to get really loose, you're kind of limited in your options other than just live with it. I would say try to lighten up your touch a little bit. Don't press down as hard, you know. That's one kind of just entry, you know, level tip for anyone writing with the fountain pens. You don't have to press that hard, or you shouldn't have to press that hard anyway if the pen is working properly. It should work just by kind of touching it on the paper, and you don't have to like press down on it to make it happen. So if you just lighten up the pressure on it, that right there will probably take care of pretty much any issue that you would have. Cool? So there you go. That's going to be it for this week. My question of the week for you is, what pens do you wish that you could love, but you just don't? You know, kind of like I think about certain foods that I have, like jalapenos. I wish I could love them, but I just don't. So I always have to ask for them to be picked off at restaurants. Is there any like pen or ink or any like pen related thing that you have that you really wish you could love, but you don't? And then my writing prompt for you, this is to write a 500-word short story with a surprise twist ending. So if you're into that kind of thing, might be kind of fun for you to do. A little bit different writing prompts, giving you actually like word assignments than I've done in Q&As past. So anyway, I hope you all have a good weekend, a good rest of your week. Do want to give you a little bit of a heads up, kind of an Easter egg at the end of Q&A here. If you are happening to be going to the San Francisco Pen Show, I am going to be in attendance there. I've got some friends out that way that I want to see. So I'm going to be out there for the show, and I'll be there. So if you happen to be going to the show, come and say hi. I'm just going to be attending as a guest. I'm not going to have, just going to be me, nobody else. I've actually never been to a pen show other than DC and Atlanta, so it should be kind of interesting for me. I hear San Francisco's a good show, so that'll be happening not this weekend, but next weekend. So it should be kind of cool. Anyway, you can check out a lot of the pens that I talked about here today on gouletpens.com. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and write on.